Another month, another cake. Oh, I swear this cake is so soft. Happy summer. Hi, my name is Yana. I'm a modern ajumma. I'm eating cake for breakfast. I made a coconut cake the other day. No occasions. Just because it's summer, it's that Dolly Parton cake mix. It's really good. I got my coffee. I'm ready. Ooh, and I also got LASIK eye surgery. I'm pretty sure before I was so like close up to the camera that my face was like, you know, like I was like this, and it was because I couldn't see. And now I can. I treated myself to the ability of sight. So yeah, June was a lot, but I read 10 books this month. Let's talk about them. I read Never Broken, Songs Are Only Half the Story, a memoir by Jewel on library audiobook read by the author. Safety is in vulnerability, not in armor. I learned my body came equipped with the most exquisite alarm system in the world, emotions and instincts. As you may know, I have been a lifelong fan of Jewel. I was like a 10-year-old begging my parents to buy me tickets to go to Lilith Fair. And I learned a lot about her. And despite my decades-long fandom, I learned so much about her that I never knew before that, like, I stopped from maybe after her holiday album, because after that, her sound went like straight into pop, and I was like, wait, what? Why did you leave me? And it turns out it was because she had given all of her money management to her mother, who she hired as her business manager, who subsequently lost all of her money. And so in Jewel's like 30s, she basically had to start all over again, remake her money after pulling herself out of millions of dollars in debt. Like, no wonder why she pivoted to pop. But I didn't know that she wrote one of my favorite songs, Rosie and Mick, as a teenager. She lived in Kaneohe, Hawaii. She rode a horse to work. But I think my biggest shock is that she wasn't some superstar child guitar virtuoso. Like, I just kind of assumed that she was. She learned like in her late teens, her 20s. But growing up, listened to her music. I mean, to me, she's like my female guitar god, one of. She's so sensitive in like her picking technique and like the inherent storytelling in her guitar melodies. And as a teenager, I felt like I was way too old to learn and get as good as she is. So I never even tried. What could have been? So having said all that, this was such a concrete example for never meeting your heroes. I'm fairly certain I would just personally not gel with her, like with her personality. She's such a beautiful poet. I own like 2 books of poetry written by her. I want to say from like the early 2000s. And we know what great long form writing we can expect from poets. This isn't it. Like, I expected so much better writing than this. I even expected better reading than this. I don't know if any of you guys watch And Just Like That, but there was a recent episode where Carrie is reading her audiobook and she's like struggling to get through the chapter of somebody dying. But like her reading of those sentences, I know that it's a comedy, but I was like snort laughing because she's talking about someone she loves breathing his last breath, and her reading of it was so glib and normal. I know that it's intentional, like that's an acting choice, but like that's kind of how Jewel read this book. To my ears, she read everything kind of blasé. And I was like, really? Come on. She's also very guilty of making generalizations, stereotyping. Perhaps that's like a generational difference, but it just still left me wanting. Does she have grit? Absolutely. She is sandpaper. But it's really the tone that's what's off-putting. Like, here's how I valiantly overcame my considerable, no argument there, struggles. So this overall felt way more like a self-help book from a bona fide celebrity than like a writerly memoir, which is what I was expecting. If that's what you need to hear at the moment, read this. But like me, if you were a fan and you just kind of wanted more of her art, this is not it. Like, I think the world of her singing, her songwriting, she is hands down the best judge from the sing-off. She has so many like beautiful layered tones in her voice, so many good lines of lyrics. Yeah, maybe I just have bad posture and that's why I keep coming up close. I'll try to sit straight. I read My Southern Journey by Bragg, also another library audiobook read by the author. I never heard of who Bragg is. I literally just started reading this because I had been reading a Nora Ephron audiobook and I was pulling up like the image on Amazon. But while I was there, I was like reading customer reviews and somebody had mentioned this book saying this is so much better than Nora Ephron and her evocation of a place. And I was like, whoa, fighting words. And it happened to be available on library audio. So I borrowed it. And yeah, I was like immediately immersed in it, much thanks to the very thickly accented author. I believe it's an Alabama accent, though he has moved around the South a lot, but I think he mostly lives in New Orleans. So I recommend this book, and I would even go so far as to say don't even bother reading this book unless it's through an audiobook, through the audiobook read by him. Oh, shit. I went through the rigmarole of adjusting my camera so that you could see George, only for him to move. Oh, but this book is an ode to language. And you know, like we all have that preconception of like the best English coming from like a British voice, a British accented voice, like Shakespeare words, and anything sounding Southern is like Hicksville, it's dumb, but oh, contraire. We talk like we're tasting something. I'm not even gonna bother trying a Southern accent because I suck at accents, we know this. I love that every old woman's purse in every pew smells like a fresh stick of juicy fruit. They say a kitchen is the heart of a house, but I believe the porch is its soul. Memory is not an inventory, not a catalog of events, but a time machine. The past is not dead, and so the dead are never really gone. We resurrect them daily for one more story, one more boat naps or ball game, or one more cast into the cool water. In my hand was a can of Coke so cold it burned. Pat Conroy ate 10 oysters with nothing but a smile. Eyebrows raised, respected too. Such a sense of place. I wish that I too could talk like this, not like in the accent, but like there's nothing more dull and banal than just like using cuss words. You know, like F this, that effing thing, this a-hole that. I want to be more fun and colorful with my curses. And I have been trying. I don't have that good grasp of language myself. And reading this just reminded me of this particular ambition of mine. Learning from a master and oh, the possibilities that could be. But yeah, this book is basically a compilation of his essays that were previously published in magazines like Southern Living, ESPN, which has, even though I really liked all of the essays, and there's a lot about like mundane life, cooking, all my favorite things, but surprisingly, my favorite essay, hands down, is the one about football. And I am not a football person, American football. I mean, I'm really not a sports person at all, especially for American football. But his writing on football and the way the South feels about football was so primal. He like makes a connection to the feelings that Southerners have for football all the way back to the feelings they have about the Civil War and reparations and centuries of having your culture made into a joke, all channeled into this one point of focus, football, where they can finally get a win, finally taking back some semblance of pride and ownership. Poor choice of words there, I know. But that kind of brings me to the how can a liberal POC lady such as myself tolerate these white male justifications question? And TBH, I can't even go there and think that way. I can't even say that I don't want to listen and accept, because I do. And any ire should be directed at the, I don't know, Supreme Court assholes and people like them who accept benefits and then deny they've merited any help from other people and proceed to shut the door on those who could follow after them. Overall, this book was a contemplation on pain and suffering, my fave, and it really resonated with me. It was an absolute feast and treasure of language. Speaking of another evocation of a place, this time in Manhattan, New York, I Remember Nothing and Other Reflections by Nora Ephron. Even though I own a physical copy of the book, I read through a library audio read by the author. I went to a store to buy a book about Alzheimer's disease and forgot the name of it. I thought it was funny, and it was at the time. This one came out in 2010, and I Feel Bad About My Neck came out before this one, and I think this was like a, you know, the first one did so well, can you crank out another one, here's a check type of book. It's so slim. This was 3 hours long. I listened to it in a single sitting. I do prefer I Feel Bad About My Neck, but it's not like this one was bad. It's a lot of like old people stuff, like forgetting names and faces and words and places, but somehow making it funny and cute. A lot of anecdotes, like she was actually there at the Ed Sullivan Theater when the Beatles performed, when the Beatles debuted in the US and essentially started the 60s. But all she can remember is how awful the obnoxious teenagers were in the crowd. But that's kind of one of the endearing qualities of Nora Ephron, how she can make everything very near, very personal. Like there is nothing big picture about it. The past is slipping away and the present a constant affront. And yeah, I mean, I listened to this right after getting LASIK and healing and feeling old because I got LASIK eye surgery, and it just kind of resonated in that way. And yeah, because this one was written later when she was older, she does have quite a few old lady rants, like about dessert spoons, and even back in 2010 about what content is. And of course, more serious topics like divorce, friends dying, and how to move on. But overall, my absolute favorite part about Nora Ephron is she's just one of those people who always think that IRL trumps fiction every time, that the best fiction comes from real life. I mean, she was a journalist, and we gotta celebrate that. And for me, these two people go hand in hand. I read Tom Hanks's debut novel, The Making of Another Major Motion Picture Masterpiece. It's so hard to imagine someone so charismatic, so extroverted as Tom Hanks to sit still for months at a time alone to write a novel. Though maybe he just entertained himself just fine. I know we all know this, but he is so smart and he doesn't dumb things down. He respects your integrity and your intelligence as a reader. This was great. I really like this. It's actually quite thick and longer than I expected it to be. I'm not really an editor, so I can't really say if I wished it could be cut shorter, but yeah, he must have some calling to speak on the generational trauma brought on by the original sins of like World War II and of course the intricacies of filmmaking. But at certain parts, this was like hands over my eyes, bone achingly good. There is so much plot, so many characters, so many turns that end up landing at the end. Like, he pulled that off. I shed a tear. He's been saying in interviews that he thinks of himself as a writer with a day job. I actually Googled if he's a genius. It didn't give me a very conclusive answer, but I'd like to think so. Like this very long title that I will probably never remember. It's about the making of a movie, and he knows and names every figure within the system and breathes a whisper of a life into them all, which isn't nothing. But that implied empathy is what won me over. He shares every facet of the movie making process, from the backstory of the inspiration to the movie theater experience. And I could not help but think of Babylon. I found that so mean, like pretentious, self-aggrandizing, while this was very earnest, and they both say the same thing, but in very different tones. The plot is all about making a movie, but this novel is not really about the movie. It's about all of the people who make the movie, not just the actors, not just the director, the writers, but like every crew member, the nieces and nephews of the man who inspired the backstory of the movie, the spouses of the actors. Like, it, one of the most endearing details I thought was at the end of each production day, a line director tells the whole set as they end for the day, "Thank you, and remember, you are all loved." I also really appreciated that, like, we all know what a director does, we all know what an actor does, we all know what a writer does, we all know what an editor does, but we don't really know, we can't really put our finger and articulate what a producer does. But this book aced that cue so well, and hands down my favorite characters are the two producers. And Tom Hanks put so much of the magic into those characters, doing the mundane day-to-day work of getting the job done. Like, you know at every job you come across coworkers who are either a details person or a big picture person, and the big picture person's always the person who's like the face, and the details person is always the one who does the work. Tom Hanks is a details person, and this is a book for all the details people. The people who solve problems, get things done. I also got the sense that Tom Hanks is probably like a delegator as opposed to a micromanager. But yeah, I love Uncommon Type, his first book of short stories. And with this, there's no denying it. His is undeniably a voice, capital V, with as simplistic writing as his big brain and charms will allow, considering everything that it knows. He had me looking up synchronica machines. And this is also a lockdown book. Like, COVID is a factor in this plot. He wrote this during lockdown. But with everything going on in this, that wasn't even at the forefront of my mind, even though I love lockdown books. But it makes sense. He's sitting there thinking, how can I help? What do I know that can help somebody in any way? And it's all in here. I guess that's why it's so thick. There's just something a sense of equality and devotion to a craft, the craft of filmmaking, that I'm sure only the best film sets have the privilege of evoking. Like, if life could be a film set, I endeavor to shape myself thusly. Like, I want to be a wealth of so much charm, so much knowledge, so much personality, and to share whatever it is that I've got with others. I read Latitude by Natasha Rao because I found it from someone commenting on Etima's Pleasures of the Text on one of her videos, read Nigerian poetry. and it just sounded so interesting. And I read it, and it is beautiful. It is so beautiful. Lily is wearing only the desperate hum of hornets looking for work, alone in the kitchen, lowering the pleated skirt of a cupcake. Something stuck to his shoe, a small wad of brain, freshly pink. When confronted with my lack of gentleness, I blame birth control or the moon, but haunted by the palpitations of a mouse stuck in glue, I knew atonement was beyond my trapping. I keep offering the soft meat of myself to people I meet on the internet, save the stinging quills for those who love me. Newly blueberried air. Oh, it's so delicious to read. It's gorgeous visuals. Her POV is so visceral, so very right now, like in our This Is Fine era, and just trying to make sense of this crazy world. There's a beautiful intro that got straight into the heart of why I started reading again in post-2020, where I was just seeking answers from the world and trying to make sense out of what seems nonsensical. Even though this is so slim I felt very full afterwards. This felt like a feast of words and feelings. I read Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. I was so hyped for this all year because I went into this basically seeking the answer to the question, what do I do about my love for Kanye West music? And just stemming from there, like what do we do about the art that we love, but unfortunately was made by, at best problematic, at worst, monsters. So in short, the subject of this book is something that I just think about all the time. And I wanted to read what somebody else, who apparently has been thinking about this all the time as well, thought. I'm just gonna spoil it for you. It's inconclusive. You're not gonna get an answer out of this. But I guess if anything, it does give you some form of guidance, if not like clarity. I did find the idea that our current culture is so primed to having it all, where we expect the best out of everybody because we literally have limitless options now. But that also made me realize that the internet's best aspect to me is it upends that previous perception that best art, the best entertainment that you can find has to come from like a professional, can only be like from a genius artist or a celebrity, like your 20th century Hollywood era Marilyn Monroe's, the Brad Pitts. But like currently every day, we're all mostly intrigued by social media posts from random everyday people because real life is what's so interesting. And not that celebrity is unnecessary, just more of the extremities of social structure. And what do you find at extremes? And so, yeah, it's probably unrealistic to demand the same standards, but like, what are we gonna do with that? And I found her reminder that the reason why this is such a struggle for a lot of us is because we're talking about emotions here. We're talking about our love for this art, if not for the artist, but definitely for the art itself, because we have that emotional bond, that connection of pathos. And when we're talking about emotions, there's no logical rules may apply. And so I did like a few of the essays written in this, especially the one about Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. It is everything that I think and have said about Lolita. Like, to me, if you've never read Lolita, that is like the standout essay in this. I really don't want to, give spoilers in my videos, but like, if you haven't read Lolita, it's not about perverts, it's not about pedophilia. Nabokov is not praising them. It's really about how everyday people can be monsters. And what's one of the most interesting things about that book itself is the social perception that we have of it still to this day, where that's what we think about what that book is about when it's not. So if you have such personal struggles yourself, you may be interested in reading this. However, because I think about this all the time, it really just felt like I was reading my own thoughts, but like much better articulated, much more shaped out. And ultimately, I will continue to grapple with Kanye. He will continue to be my devil and my angel. I read Deeda Blair, Food, Flowers, and Fantasy that I got from the library. I've had this book in my cart for so long, like since before it was published, just because Sofia Coppola put it on her Instagram, and I was so intrigued because she's like the OG influencer for me. I was lucky to get it from the library because I saved myself 60 bucks. Sorry, medical research. And yeah, I found this much like Sofia Coppola, very stylish, elegant, cold, quiet, serious, like a facade, cutting cheekbones. Deeda Blair is a socialite and a philanthropist. This book in particular is basically like that Joni Mitchell book that I read last year, where she is known so much for her taste on things, and her friends are all like fans of her taste, and so she compiled a book of like her personal recommendations, her recipes, her favorite things and inspirations to give to her friends for Christmas, like using her favorite Italian papers, which is nice. Like the cover of this book is this, I think she said in the book that it's an Italian fabric. It's filled with personal photos from her life. Her husband was a diplomat during the Kennedy administration. I thought of Ronan Farrow's book, War on Peace, where he said that diplomacy was done via social parties and it wasn't for him. Well, this is the other side of that. Like, she was the social parties. As I said, Deeda Blair is a philanthropist in the medical field, in the medical research field. And I don't know why, but I was surprised by good taste, not just in things, but ideas, IG, identifying creative sciences. And found her stories of going to fashion shows and coming back home with checks to purchase medical equipment for AIDS research. Kind of funny, but like realizing that that's just how real life works sometimes. But overall, this book is really a sheer force of this one woman's personality, and it is mesmerizing. I was very impressed. This is high aesthetics, but ultimately we're at economic odds. Like this is the antithesis of everything that is me. I'm just too middle class for this book. Like, she talks about how she hates seeing plates laden with too much food, and one of my favorite things is a buffet. And one of my favorite visuals is a plate like laden with food and having a lot of different options. And she says like maximum she'll only have 3 things on a plate and a dessert, maybe. Appetizer or dessert. But because she prefers sweets, most likely dessert, but never both. And this is like such rich lady shit where, you know, she prefers fewer but better quality, like quality over quantity. And you know, her house, while it's lovely, just feels a little bit boring, even though like I fully believe, like I'm not a minimalist, I'm a maximalist in whatever form that takes. And whatever choices you make, that's what reflects your personality. But like, I don't know, what must your life be like if you can't stand having stuff in your house because you have to prioritize serenity in your home? I like a lot of mementos. I like stuff. And yeah, I guess like the last nail on the coffin was the photographs are very personal. They're like travel snapshots from vacations she took, but the photographs were taken by like renowned fashion photographers. I know we're in this eat the rich stage of post-capitalism, but that's really not what turned me off of this book. Overall, I got the sense that I do when I watch Wes Anderson films, where it's aesthetically very pleasing, and I am pleased, but I'm also nodding off and a little bored. Oh, a book that I was not bored at all, not once, from is Bones and All by Camille DeAngelis. I read this because I watched the film recently and was so captivated. I don't know how Luca Guadagnino does it. Like, he is an old man, but he captures youth so brilliantly. I mean, he's not that old, but so if I was that mesmerized by the film, the book I just had to read the book to see how different it is. It's a little bit different, not only in some details, but kind of in tone too. I can't say that I prefer one over the other because I do enjoy both in their own ways. But this was fast-paced, immersive, another W for me in terms of enjoying stories about young people. Written in the 21st century. I truly felt it all. Like that insecurity, yearning for a better situation, for the boy, things unsaid, that juvenile feeling you have when you're young, when you feel bad, like you're insufficient and there's nothing to be done about it except wallow. This book is so fun. Like, very good prose. It's sexy and edgy, intense. It was like a very palatable form of digesting sex and violence and sin. This is like the YA book equivalent of a torn black leather motorcycle jacket, stinking of cigarettes and body odor and musk that you want to wear while thinking about sex. There is zero actual sex in this, to be clear, unless you want to think about the cannibalism as sex. And maybe so, if that's your vice, because that's ultimately what this book is about. Like, it's about when you're young and you have like a vice, however great or tame, and you're just feeling bad about it. There is an author's note in the back talking about the irony of herself being vegan, but she wrote a book about cannibalism and how ironic that is. But TBH, I wouldn't have even thought of that at all, because there was no like big preachiness to this, like no big lessons learned here. It just felt so feral and so much rage. This book also had so much literary taste. Like, you can tell that she's read a lot of books and she's a reader, and that was very enjoyable. Like, I believe that the main character who is a reader is an actual reader, because the writer is a reader. When I read a book, I can be somebody else. For 200 or 300 pages, I can have the problems of a normal person, even if that person is traveling through time or fighting with aliens. Yeah, this is so good. I read Whale by Kwan, translated by Cheon Kim, which I buddy read with Nathan, and we had so much fun reading this. This, surprisingly, is such a fast read. From the first paragraph, it sucks you in like a whirlpool. Oh, this was like old school Korea vibes. Harsh, no nonsense. Abrupt, matter of fact, hard work that goes unsaid because that's the norm. Smart, resourceful, astounding pacing that just won't let you put it down. So many cliffhangers and Easter eggs and twists and turns that all perfectly and satisfyingly executed. Like, so did the Tom Hanks book, but this does that so much more deftly. And this has so much finesse in the writing that you can only assume that that comes from decades of experience and, I don't know, a higher level of brain power. Like, this was so smart, but at the same time so fun. I really enjoyed how like the magical realism, like the magical weirdness felt so translatable to the natural world. But my favorite aspect of this book is, this book, even though it's up for like, I'm not a literary prize person, I don't pay attention to those things, but I believe that this is like shortlisted for something this year, and that's why it's getting so much buzz at the moment, and that's why the English translation is like current. But this was actually written back in 2004, and the biggest surprise for me in this book was not so much like there's a very big plot twist in this, but the political spin it took, because 2004, I know, is not that long ago, but in Korea at that time, this would have been a very shocking book. And I was just imagining myself reading this back then. Had I been a Korean in Korea, like, this book would have felt revolutionary to me and mind-blowing. So even though I was buddy reading this with Nathan, I couldn't help myself. I should have been pacing myself, but I had to know how this book ended, where it took me, and I ended up finishing before him. And there's a lot of sex in this book, unlike Bones and All. And I was just in such a tizzy that I needed that release. I apologize to Nathan for coming early. So given all this excitement, all this tension, the bittersweet end, oh, I was in tears. I couldn't believe the roller coaster of a ride this book took me on. Oh, stinging tears. And the ultimate pain is what the lasting impression of this book gives, in that though there are scary people out in the world is a hard place to live in. No matter how much pain you're suffering, it's worth it all. It's worth being here to find the few people who are special to you in your life for the short time you may live it. And I was talking about like seeking answers in all of my reading, and I found an answer in this beautiful work of fiction, Korean literature. And it did felt really good to buddy read it with somebody like Nathan, who I've only met and known for a very short period of time, but who I quickly felt so close to, as if we've been like lifelong friends. This was so good. Like immediately top 10 material, top 10 of the year. And last but not least, I read American Wife by Curtis Sittenfeld. I know I have the physical copy of this book, but I read it as a library audiobook read by Kimberly Farr. This was so fun. I mean, I had so much fun with romantic comedy. I really had no idea, like, who Curtis Sittenfeld was, like, what her shtick is. Turns out her shtick is fan fiction about, like, famous people, about popular celebrities. And even though this was a 23-hour audiobook, I ripped through that bee. But really, American Wife is about Americana fanfic. So if you don't know, American Wife is fanfic about Laura Bush, the wife of George W. Bush. So if you have to think about it that way, by all means, but really, in essence, it's about just a small town girl living in a lonely world, about puppy love, about misogyny, the big man who protects his little lady, being adored by your beau, bitchy girlfriends, gay grandmas, family secrets. And while this was so fun, it really felt more than its parts. Even though this is about a very middle-class woman with very few problems and living a very good life, the surprise is that when you dig deeper, there's so much more there. This is another book where you believe that the character is a reader, has a deep love for literature. A lot of books are mentioned in this. I'm sure that had I read this when it first came out back in 2008, right at the end of the Bush presidency, I probably would not have felt the same way about it, but like I definitely needed this distance post-Bush era, past Trump 2020 for like relativity. And I know that I'm really enjoying this right now at this stage of my life at this time. It's like a right time, right age situation. But what feels so special about this book is that its focus is the female POV. It feels so real. Whatever she thinks her desires is what matters, is the priority. Like I kind of felt like, I mean, I've never read the books, the Twilight books. I've only seen the Twilight films. And while it's not necessarily the case for the later films, but definitely in the first Twilight film, like you get that Bella Swan is the main character. What Bella wants is the priority. And that's what I felt about this. Who knew that Laura Bush would be my Bella Swan? And just whenever the female desire is what's deemed important, I am so there. I'm all for it, all about it. There is a lot of sexy sex in this book as well. And I was really struck by the fact that in this plot, if viewed from a different POV, it would totally be like a Martin Scorsese film plot where George Bush is the main character, but not in this book. This book, we purely get the woman's POV, and what began as a romancy Twilight book ended up becoming one of the most contemplative fictional works on marriage that I've read so far. Do I feel more of a kinship to Laura Bush now that I've read this? No, absolutely not. But do I feel obsession for Curtis Sittenfeld? Absolutely. Oh, the past, the past. How the memories of the people I loved sear me. That was everything that I read in June. It was a rompin' month. Rompin'? I had a lot of fun. I'm so glad that I can see better now and I can like sit back more. And yeah, I was so overtaken by so many different powerful personalities in all the books that I read. And I hope that you all had some powerful personalities in your life during the month of June as well. And some good cake too. Thanks for watching. Cheers.